Hey everyone, and welcome to Evidence Mastery. In this explainer, we're jumping into the book Real World Evidence, Principles and Practice by Dr. Massoud Toussi. We're going to be laser focused on Chapter 11, which tackles the absolutely critical meeting point of real-world evidence and health technology assessment. So let's kick things off with a big one, a question that's really at the heart of modern healthcare. How do we decide if an amazing, new, life-saving drug is actually worth what can be a really high price? It's not just about proving it works anymore. It's about proving it brings enough value to our healthcare systems to justify that cost. Well, the official answer to that question comes from a process called Health Technology Assessment, or HTA for short. Now, it's super important to remember this is not the same as getting regulatory approval. Regulators ask, is this safe and does it work? But HTA bodies, they ask a much tougher question. Is it good value for the money compared to what we're already using? This is where science, economics, and policy all collide. And that question of value brings us to a major shift in how we think about evidence. For decades, one type of evidence was king, but decision makers and HTA found themselves with these huge gaps in what they needed to know. It became clear that a whole new approach was needed. That old gold standard was, of course, the randomized controlled trial, the RCT. And for good reason. They're incredibly good at figuring out cause and effect. But, and this is a big but, for HTA, which has to make decisions for the messy, complicated real world, RCTs just have some serious blind spots. And this is where real-world evidence, or RWE, steps onto the stage. So what are these evidence gaps? Well, think about it. RCTs often leave out the very patients who will use a new treatment in the real world, like older folks or people with multiple health issues. The follow-up times can be too short to see the long-term picture, and sometimes the trial doesn't even compare the new drug to what doctors are actually using in a particular country. And this is exactly where RWE comes in to save the day. It acts like a bridge. It connects the pristine, controlled world of a clinical trial to the day-to-day reality of patient care. RWE comes from data sources like electronic health records and insurance claims, giving HTA bodies the context they desperately need to see how a technology really performs. Now, this shift didn't just happen overnight. It's been a journey. As you can see here, if you go back 20 years, RWE was pretty much on the sidelines when it came to proving effectiveness. But as the methods got better and the limits of RCTs became more obvious, its role just kept growing. And now, we have formal frameworks, and RWE is a standard, crucial part of the conversation. And look, this isn't just theory. Major HTA bodies all over the world are actively using RWE in their decision-making. So, let's take a quick trip around the globe to see how this is actually playing out. First stop, the UK. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, or NICE, is really ahead of the curve here. They have this amazing living framework for RWE that they constantly update. They use it all the time to fill in those evidence gaps, especially for things like new cancer drugs where the long-term trial data might not be ready at launch. Hopping over to Germany, the story's a bit different. IQYG is known for being, let's say, very rigorous. Assessing bias is everything to them. But even with their cautious approach, they totally recognize that for some things, like rare diseases, where you just can't do a big RCT, RWE is absolutely essential. And then there's Canada, where we're seeing this really cool, modern, and collaborative approach. In 2023, the CDA, AMC, and Health Canada actually teamed up to release joint guidance. They're actively using RWE to build their economic models and to figure out how treatments work for specific groups of patients who might have been missed in the original trials. Okay, now for the big one, the real game changer in the space, especially in Europe, the new EU Joint Clinical Assessment, or JCA. Seriously, this is set to fundamentally rewire the HTA landscape for all 27 member states. So how's it going to work? Well, it's a phased rollout and kicks off in January 2025 with oncology drugs and advanced therapies. Then in 2028, it expands to orphan drugs, and by 2030, it'll cover all new medicines. It basically creates one single clinical evaluation for the whole EU, though each country will still decide on its own pricing. All right, if you're involved in drug development, listen up, because this is the crucial point. The JCA happens almost immediately after a drug gets authorized. So what does that mean? It means RWE can't be a we'll get to it later kind of thing anymore. It has to be planned and pretty much ready to go during clinical development. That's a massive strategic shift. Okay, so we've established that RWE is absolutely essential. But, and this is a big but, how do you actually create RWE that's good enough, that's robust enough, to get a thumbs up from these HTA agencies? Let's get into the toolkit. One of the coolest and most powerful tools we have is something called target trial emulation. It sounds super technical, I know, but the idea is actually pretty elegant. First, you design the perfect hypothetical trial you wish you could run. Then you dig into real-world data to find patients in situations that mimic or emulate that ideal trial as closely as possible. It brings that RCT-level thinking to observational data. And to make this even more practical, the book lays out a really useful checklist for any HTA submission, which we've summarized here. It really boils down to 4 key things: having a crystal clear study protocol, describing your data source in detail, having a pre-planned analysis, and reporting your results with total transparency. Nail these 4, and you're in a great position. So, as we start to wrap this up, I think it's crystal clear that we are way past the point of debating if RWE has a place in HTA. The future isn't coming, it's already here. And in this future, RWE's role isn't just accepted, it's absolutely essential. Look, if there's just one thing you remember from our time today, let it be this. For health technology assessment, real-world evidence is no longer a nice-to-have or an alternative. It is an essential, non-negotiable part of the puzzle. And that really leaves us with one final, crucial question for you to think about. Looking at what agencies like NICE are asking for, the dawn of the EU JCA, and the high bar for methods, is your evidence generation strategy truly ready for this new reality? Of course, there is so much more to unpack here. So if you really want to dive deeper into the methodologies, the global frameworks, and especially that new EU regulation, I highly recommend you explore the full guide, Real-World Evidence, Principles, and Practice. You can find it on Amazon.com. Thanks so much for watching.